Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome. This is Patricia Warby, Alchemy Therapies, and another update. Another week has gone by. I want to talk today about something I've been researching recently, which is neurodiversity and the overlap with highly sensitive people. Now, when I wrote my book, The Highly Sensitive Handbook, I've got a copy here. I wrote a book last year in 2023 about this because it is my belief that high sensitivity is a trait that you are born with, that's present in the womb. It's not just my belief, it's actually the scientific research that shows this. And a big question that came in after I'd written that book was, how does it overlap with neurodiversities that are neurodevelopmental? In other words, they occur as the child grows, in development. And so I wanted to address that. There is a chapter in the book. I'm going to expand that a bit as more information is coming in now every day, particularly for women and girls, because we're a hidden divergent population, in fact, because most research up till very recently was largely done on boys and men, and the way that neurodiversity shows up in them is often very, very different because men's brains are different, okay? Men and women's brains have significant differences because we are biologically wired in different ways. And so let's start with the basics then. So a neurodiversity means basically that your brain works differently to the neurotypical population. That's the roughly, I would say, 70 to 80% of the population whose brains work in very regular, predictable ways, I guess you could say. And neurodiversity seems to diverge, hence the name, from that regular way of operating. Now, that doesn't mean to say neurodiversity is a problem. It can be, but it doesn't mean to say it is. It can be something very precious, and things that people say when they have this kind of condition, whether they have ADHD, whether they have a form of autism, or even just high sensitivity per se, is that they treasure it because it gives them a different way of viewing the world, which gives them higher sensitivity, higher creativity, and a higher awareness, I guess, of just the way the world works. And so we can be incredibly creative people. But obviously, the way the world works doesn't always support the way our brains work. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience because I'm not an expert on all the other forms of neurodiversity, and I'm not going to pretend I am. But I do know high sensitivity, and I do suspect there is a huge overlap with ADHD, or what was formerly called ADD. Attention hyperactivity disorder is a very interesting, it's an overlapping condition. It has particular traits, I guess, that do suggest that the brain is not working in ways, from its dopaminergic system is not working in the way it should be working. And so impulsivity can be very high, but equally with some people, so can procrastination and difficulty making decisions. And so there are a few telltale signs. Let's talk about those. All right, a short attention span, okay, especially for non-preferred tasks. Now, this is something I can absolutely tick, all right? If I'm really interested in something, I'm really interested in this subject, I'm really interested in the work that I do, working with people, and I love disseminating information and writing books, I can focus generally really well. If you give me something that doesn't interest me, I really struggle. So that's a sort of selective attention, okay? Fidgeting. I try not to fidget when I'm online and when I'm recording these videos, obviously. But I have noticed since I was little, in order to get to sleep at night, I would have to jiggle my feet, actually sort of vibrate my feet to get to sleep. I see many people when I'm out and about jiggling their legs or jiggling their feet, just to kind of neurologically balance. That's what's happening. You're trying to soothe yourself, but it's all unconscious and you wouldn't necessarily know that you're doing it. Disorganisation. Now, this is one that many people have. It's not a not one that I would say I particularly tick, although other people might disagree. Um, I can be organized. I'm not super efficient or tidy, I would admit that. But when I'm focused, I can organize myself to get things done. But many people get easily overwhelmed. And when I was ill with chronic fatigue syndrome about 20 years ago, I did find it really hard to get organized. And I noticed that my brain simply wouldn't focus on what order I needed to put things in. And so there was no discrimination on tasks. And so everything became overwhelming, and therefore you don't do any of it. So that's another telltale sign. What about time blindness? You're really not aware of time. And so you're often late for appointments, even though you know you have them, and even though you've set alarms, you might not find it easy to get to things on time. So that's something I've observed with friends of mine, actually, because neurodiverse people tend to have neurodiverse friends. Okay, so friends of mine who really struggle, even though you set up the appointment, you learn to set the appointment up earlier than you really mean, so that they do arrive at the time you're expecting. Mood swings and emotional dysregulation. Now, this is particularly so for women, I would say, because hormonally we're very cyclical. We're moving up and down over the month when we're menstruating. So it's definitely something that varies over time, and how you feel can really be dependent on your hormonal balance as well. That's something I talked about in the book. Emotional dysregulation, what does that mean? It means things upset you really easily, and you find it really hard to calm down after that's happened. Okay, so you might think you're coping with stuff, but actually internally, your system isn't really coming back down to baseline. It's still really troubled by something. So we're very sensitive to criticism, for instance, or being found fault with. Things that go wrong, I find, really trouble me. If something goes wrong with the car or the house, or somebody gets sick, particularly me, if it's something happening to me, I can really feel the emotional dysregulation of that. Forgetfulness, yeah. So that can be really exacerbated by having energy issues, brain fog issues, because of perhaps mitochondrial dysfunction. But you find that you forget why you went into a room. That's very common with menopausal women, but lots of people suffer from that. And you forget where you left your keys, or what you were supposed to be doing. And I have noticed, I definitely have that trait, that things just slip out my head. So I say, right, I'm going to do that now. And then I find myself doing something else, because I'm always looking for that dopamine hit. And so I'm very easily distracted away from the task that I've set myself. By the way, scrolling on your phone, if you're doing that now while listening to me, I bet you are, that's a dopamine hit. Okay, so getting likes, getting something that's interesting to you is an immediate dopamine surge. And so that's why people with neurodiversity, ADHD in particular, are much more likely to become addicted to things, because that's the way they get their dopamine. And dopamine helps rebalance the kind of low levels that are naturally present in ADHD people. Okay, trouble multitasking. Right, now this is one that this really confused me at first, because I was thinking, well, I'm always multitasking. In fact, that's one of the traits I find in myself, is that I've always got multiple things on the go. But actually, what it means is I'm not very focused on any one of them. I'm doing them all semi efficiently. And so I guess you could say that is trouble multitasking, because my brain will suddenly say, I'm in the middle of something, and it'll say, no, check this, you need to check this, or move to that, you didn't do that, you need to go to that thing, and it'll take me off task. So thinking about that, that's the problem with executive function. An executive function is a property of your front brain that kind of moves you from thinking a thought to doing something. That's what executive means. Is getting into doing. And often we don't translate that very well, or we distract ourselves away from doing, which of course links into the procrastination as well. Another thing, the distractibility, okay, and this is really key. You're easily distracted unless you are hyper focused on something that completely takes your attention. Now, what I've noticed, I've mentioned it before, probably in a very old video that I did, but if I'm on the phone to someone, I'm talking to someone, and somebody talks to me, I lose both inputs. Okay, I cannot focus on what the person on the phone is saying to me or the person who's making a comment. And this is really, really annoying. And I've realized a long time ago that that isn't what other people experience, that they kind of tune into what the other person is saying and then they say, sorry, what did you say? My brain just scrambles, and I can't remember what I was saying on the phone or what the person just said to me. And so I have to stop and interrupt the phone call to get the information that I need and then apologize to the person that I was talking to. So I have to warn friends and family not to talk to me while I'm on the phone because I simply cannot take the information in. That's really a big factor that I've noticed. The other thing, I guess, distractibility is linked to what I said before, is that you move around between tasks. You're easily taken away into doing something completely novel because we like novel things. We like newness. We don't like completion, by the way. Oh, and another one, which is really, really important, difficulty awaiting your turn. Okay, have you been in this situation, right? You're in the supermarket, there's a queue, and you're thinking, oh, which queue shall I go in? You make your choice, and then you see the other queue going faster than you are, and you're like, oh, I should be in that one. That happens to me a lot. Or you're driving along, you hit a traffic jam, suddenly everything comes to a halt. You can't tell why it's come to a halt. You don't know what the problem is. You can't see that far ahead. Does that send you into sort of apoplexy, which it does me, really agitated because I can't see what's going on and I don't know when the situation is going to shift. So and it makes it sound like I'm a really difficult person to be around. Well, hopefully not, but these are just traits that I have and I'm just being honest about them. Okay, so hyperactive. Now that's the form that often is easily diagnosed in boys because they're impulsive. They get up when they should be sitting. They have to move a lot. But I've seen a lot in girls and women now. Some of my clients, in fact, we have to adapt our sessions so that we're not just sat all the time and we're able to move and do stuff because they find it really, really difficult to sit still for a long period of time. And of course, with women, there is that masking effect, which we've seen in autism. It happens in ADHD as well. The idea that you adapt to the environment that you're in and you adopt the ways of being in the world that you see around you to make sure that you don't look weird or strange and don't stand out. But equally, in order to cope, many people have to zone out completely. And that's something I can remember as a child, was being buried in books, because that's the only way I could cope with the world that was too stimulating outside of that. And so that was a common thing that was often said to me is, oh, you've always got your head in a book. Well, yes, I did, because it was the only way I could neurologically regulate. Okay. With people with ADHD, but particularly women and girls, you have a much higher rate of anxiety and depression and low self-esteem. Now, these two things do go hand in hand, because if you don't feel valid and worthwhile, you're going to feel depressed and anxious because you feel like you don't belong and there's no safety in the world. So that's a really common one and can be rebuilt, by the way. You can rebuild your self-esteem. You can learn to love yourself. I know that's a cliche, but you can learn to, at the very least, have compassion for who you are. A lot of the things you're experiencing are because of what happened to you. And that's really one of the most contentious aspects of the ADHD community at the moment is this something that just happens because of, say, genetics, or is it because of childhood trauma? And a lot of people disavow the idea that it's got anything to do with childhood trauma, I think because they misunderstand what childhood trauma is. All right, childhood trauma isn't necessarily the big things that happen to you, like you were beaten or starved or abandoned. It can actually be the things that didn't happen that needed to happen to you, and the emotional deprivation that maybe you experienced. And that can happen even in a very good home where your material needs were looked after. And that can be because the people looking after you are also emotionally dysregulated. Okay, so childhood trauma, I believe, is at the root of a lot of these neurodiversities where we didn't get the messages that we needed to feel safe. And when we don't feel safe, our brains don't develop in ways that feel connected and whole. And so I think, and this has a long-term consequence, of course, of giving you anxiety. And in fact, in the book, I do have a very good chart showing how the links with childhood trauma and long-term chronic depression. Okay, so chronic depression isn't random. It comes about because there are unresolved experiences in your mind and body that are trying to come to sort of fruition. They're trying to be resolved. They're trying to come into conscious awareness. But because we don't understand them and we don't know what to do with them, we tend to repress them. And the more we repress, the bigger the impulse to try and release. And you simply just get panic attacks, for instance. Okay, so what would I say then about dealing with these issues? Well, first of all, a diagnosis can be very, very helpful. It can also lead you down a rabbit hole. It varies for different people. And in my researches online, I have seen some people who've said the diagnosis was the best thing because it got them onto help and support, and sometimes drug treatment that really helped reverse their situation. For other people, the diagnosis was less clear cut. And in fact, they rejected the drug treatment because it made them more addictive in the end, and they didn't like the way they felt on the drugs. So, getting, I think, validation for how you are is the most important thing, whether you get that through a diagnosis or you get that through a support group. And for me, this awareness of being, in my middle years now and kind of aware that I have this neurodiverse brain has been so liberating, because then I stop blaming myself or shaming myself for what, in fact, isn't something that I consciously control. And I think just knowing that means that we can live a more whole and sustaining life. And I'd like to encourage all of you to maybe research if you know of somebody or it's you yourself, and find out, what it is that you can do to help heal these wounds, these kind of childhood imprints that remain in your mind and body that are promoting these disconnects in your brain. I should say there are lots of physical things you can do to help yourself, of course. And perhaps that's what I'll end on, is the basics, getting the basics right. Okay, good sleep, finding ways to enhance your sleep hygiene, making sure it's dark, it's cool when you go to sleep, making sure you're not using devices late at night, which is blue light, which tells your brain that it's still daylight. You need infrared, you need red light, so firelight, warm daylight lamps, and not staring at blue screens really helps your sleep and circadian rhythm. Getting your diet right, eating reasonably regularly to keep your blood sugar stable, not overdosing on carbs, which most of us do. Every meal should have some form of protein, slow release carbohydrate, and or fat, because fat is actually preferentially burned by our brains and provides less inflammation in our brain than carbohydrates does. So getting the diet, getting the sleep, getting movement into your system, okay? Now, I have to be very careful here because I'm not promoting excess exercise. Some people really enjoy that, getting their steps up. I mean, I myself have a wearable which counts my steps. But knowing that I'm have a tendency to addiction, you can get addicted to exercise as well, and keep upping your exercise to the point where it's starting to become unhealthy. But for most people, actually moving more, and that doesn't necessarily mean running or going to the gym. It can just be walking, which I think is a really good exercise because it's outside, because it's in the open air, because it gets you out and about. You start to look around you, and when you look around you and not down at a screen, you're actually using a really natural process of your brain to help resolve stuff. You actually feel better when you look up, and when you're looking at things that are kind of moving, flickering, you're adjusting your memory component in your brain. It's the basis of EMDR, actually, which is a treatment for trauma. So getting moving, getting your relationships right, okay? Having nurturing relationships. Now, this isn't the easiest thing to fix, but making sure that the friends you choose to spend your time with are people that support you, that are basically okay with the person you are and don't seek to undermine you or drain you, because that's a really important thing with neurodiverse people, is our boundaries tend to be rather poor. And so we want to take on everybody else's problems. And so if you've got people who are only too happy to dump on you, they're the kinds of people that will really readily exhaust you, and they can cause a huge amount of physical effects in your body because you somehow feel responsible for fixing the person's problems. And of course, it's not yours to fix. So really limiting contact with people who seek to drain you, and doing things in communities that feel supportive, whether that's an online community or it's a physical community. Getting into the outside world and interacting with people who doesn't have to be like you're talking all the time. You might be doing tasks together like gardening or community work, but you're actually interacting because you're in the presence of other people whose nervous systems are in a calm state, or in a, if not calm, they're activated in a good way. They're in a flow state. So getting your relationships at least to the point where you are not isolated and alone, because that is a really big issue for very many people. And if you're listening to this and you're perhaps not able to get out and about, just being able to get into nature appreciation, getting into noticing things outside your internal symptoms and your whatever's going on for you is helpful to rebalance your brain. So look, folks, there are answers out there, and there's so much new information coming out now that I just wanted to give some of what I've been learning in the past week or two. And once again, if you're interested, my book, the Highly Sensitive Handbook, does give a lot of tips and tricks for managing neurodiversity in general, but particularly high sensitivity, because it's something that's really dear to my heart, because it took me 40 years to find out I was highly sensitive. So I want you to understand what it is. And if there's someone in your life, whether it's you or a loved one, you need to know about this information, because it really does affect how these people operate in the world and their experience of life. So if any of that sounds interesting, do get in touch. You can find me on alchemytherapies.co.uk. And take care, everybody. Speak soon. Bye for now.